is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: French President Emmanuel Macron flies to China for his state visit, with improving relations and boosting trade high on the agenda. Our other headlines: Finland becomes the 31st member of the NATO military alliance. The length of Russia's border with NATO countries has now doubled. Moscow describes NATO enlargement as an encroachment on its security and says it's prepared to take countermeasures. Hush money allegedly paid to a porn star, Donald Trump, set to appear in a New York courthouse where he'll be fingerprinted and formally charged. And a disappearing dish, the Ansi anchovy, faces extinction in China. We look at the breeding farms trying to restore fish stocks. French President Emmanuel Macron is preparing for his state visit to China, where improving diplomatic relations is high on the agenda. He'll be joined by the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen for his three-day visit. Business leaders will also travel with the politicians as the EU and China look to revive trade that was damaged by the pandemic. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. Ross, tell us more about the French leaders' plans during this China trip.
Oh, Jamie, the Élysée Palace, the French presidential office and residence, released his plans late this morning, saying that he will be arriving into China, into Beijing, tomorrow, Wednesday, the 5th. And then on Thursday, the 6th, will be the major meeting with the new Chinese Premier Li Qiang, and then also Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, will be meeting Emmanuel Macron on Thursday. There will also be a trilateral summit with Ursula von der Leyen as well before a dinner in the evening. And then on Friday, Emmanuel Macron is set to meet students as well as members of the French community and also Chinese investors before a second dinner with the Chinese president.
And what can we expect from the discussions between the two European leaders and President Xi?
Well, Ursula von der Leyen certainly set out what she can expect from some of her discussions with, alongside Emmanuel Macron, with Xi Jinping. She tweeted this morning that she'd just been off the phone with Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, saying that Ukraine, a key part of the discussions that she will be raising with China, trying to work towards getting a just peace for Ukraine since what happened last year on the 24th of February, which China calls a crisis, which Russia calls a special military operation, which Ukraine, the European Union and France all call an invasion and a war. So there is no doubt that there will be an attempt by the European leaders to make sure that Ukraine and the relations between Beijing and Moscow feature high in the discussions, because Emmanuel Macron has said previously that he would like to try to push Xi Jinping to use his influence that the Chinese leader has with the Kremlin to force President Putin to halt the invasion of Ukraine and withdraw Russian troops from inside Ukraine. China is certainly interested in this crisis and trying to achieve a political negotiation, a political solution. European leaders have been calling for a ceasefire since the very first day that this war or conflict or crisis began in February, and so they are going to try to work on Ukraine being one of the top topics on the agenda. Also the Indo-Pacific. France sees itself as a domestic power in the Indo-Pacific region. They'll be working on reviving trade and technology and commercial ties as well, especially those which have been hit by the coronavirus pandemic.
Ross, thank you. Our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. An historic day, that's how the head of NATO described Finland's membership as it becomes the 31st member country to join the Defence Alliance. Jens Stoltenberg said Finland's membership would guarantee it ironclad security. The Finnish Foreign Minister, Pekka Haavisto, completed the accession process by handing over the official documents as he voiced support for Sweden's membership bid, which has run into difficulties with Turkey. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Alex Cadier, watching events for us in Brussels. Alex, in real terms, what does this membership mean for Finland's defence beyond today's ceremonials?
Well, Jamie, of course, it means that Finland will be part of the NATO defensive alliance. It means they will be part of the Article 5 of NATO's agreement, which means an attack on Finland would be considered an attack on all NATO members and get a response by all those members as well. Now, that does not mean it'll be triggered. That does not mean this will be a road towards that, but it adds a layer of international defense for Finland, and that is very much part of the thinking behind that Finnish decision. We saw a statement from the Finnish president saying the end of military non-alignment for Finland is over, and now a new era begins. That was the message from the Finnish president as part of this. But he also added that Finland's membership of NATO is not targeted against anyone, saying that Finland is a stable and predictable country looking for peaceful solutions to conflict. So any suggestion that this is an aggressive move is something that Finland is very eager to tone down the rhetoric about and sees very much as joining a defensive alliance. Now, this membership has been triggered, so say the Finns, by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Finland shares a massive 830-plus mile border with Russia, doubling NATO's border with Russia now that they've joined, and very clearly stating that they want to ensure greater security for their country. So that means that defensive alliance. Now, on the ground, there's not going to be a humongous amount of change, and that's what the Finnish president said earlier today, specifically pointing out that Finland has been in joint training operations with NATO, in joint peacekeeping operations with NATO in the past. Finland was already quite closely aligned to NATO in many ways, and so this is just a further progression of that alignment, Jamie.
Alex, if we can just put Finland to one side for a moment, the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, said today he was confident it wouldn't be long before Sweden joined NATO too. Turkey hasn't always seen it that way. Is there a sense that perhaps Turkey will eventually give its approval to joining soon?
Well, there's no clear sign from that at the moment. There's no date scheduled for the Turkish parliament when it comes to voting on Sweden's accession. We also need to look at Hungary and whether or not the Hungarian parliament will vote to approve Sweden's accession. The understanding is that if Turkey moves, so will Hungary. But that statement from Jens Stoltenberg saying it'll happen soon, and he's hopeful. He's previously said that all of the security assurances that Turkey needed from Sweden have been met already. They are clearly eager for this to happen as quickly as possible. Finland's accession was the fastest accession to NATO in the alliance's history, and Jens Stoltenberg and other NATO leaders eager for that to be the case for Sweden as well, to have a speedy accession. There's no timeline at the moment. There are still some frustrations for the government of Turkey and the way that they are approaching this. Discussions ongoing, NATO very keen to accelerate the process, but as I said, no date yet. Now, the unofficial target or timeline at the beginning for Jens Stoltenberg and for NATO is that this would happen before the NATO leaders summit in Vilnius in July. But one slight change in rhetoric and in language from the Secretary General, he's no longer using that as a deadline. So perhaps managing expectations, so it could be a matter of weeks, but also a matter of months. Jamie.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels. Well, the Kremlin says Finland's accession to NATO raises the risk of conflict and that Moscow is prepared to take countermeasures to protect its security. Let's talk to our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova, who's in Moscow. Dasha, what's been the response in Russia to Finland's accession to the NATO military alliance?
Well, the Kremlin said very clearly that that was an escalation of the situation and yet another encroachment on Russia's security and national interest. The Russian Foreign Ministry has also stressed that Finland will become one of the small and undeciding countries of the NATO alliance, losing its unique voice on the geopolitical arena. So understanding in Moscow is that retaliatory measures will have to be taken. Now, those have partially been announced, the strengthening of Russia's western and northwestern military flanks, but also Russia says that it will be forced to react even further should the elements of NATO military infrastructure be located in Finland. And Russia's defense ministry has been talking today. Let's hear to what he had to say.
We are taking retaliatory measures and defending the security of the Union state. Some Belarusian ground attack aircrafts received the ability to strike at enemy targets with nuclear weapons. In addition, Iskander-M operational tactical missile systems were handed over to the Belarusian armed forces. It can use both conventional and nuclear missiles.
So the Russian defense minister was very clearly saying that NATO was increasing in its anti-Russian rhetoric, and that was hostile to Russia. So that's why Russia will be forced to respond. At the same time, the Russian officials all stressed the difference that there is between the accession of Ukraine into NATO and Finland into NATO, because Russia says it has no issues with Finland, and there are no attempts to create what Russia describes as anti-Russia in Finland. At the same time, the Russian officials have also stressed that the Finland's accession into NATO, while it aggravates the situation, will not affect the outcome of what Moscow describes as a special military operation in Ukraine.
Dasha, we've been talking about NATO enlargement and Finland joining NATO. The war in Ukraine, of course, goes on. What are the latest developments today?
Well, we haven't heard much from the Russian defense minister when it comes to the situation in Bakhmut, because many are wondering who is in control of this city at the moment. But we have heard Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu saying that since the beginning of this year, Russian troops have managed to destroy 59 M777 howitzers, 13 Paladin self-propelled guns, and 14 HIMARS manufactured in the United States. So the operation is ongoing, and Russia believes that all of the objectives will be achieved, but in due time.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Donald Trump is hours away from an historic court appearance in New York, the first time a former United States president has faced criminal charges. Trump is set to surrender to authorities at a Manhattan courthouse where he'll be fingerprinted and formally charged. This case centers around an alleged hush money payment to a porn star during the 2016 presidential campaign. Trump is expected to plead not guilty. He says this case is political persecution and has called for protests. Well, let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett outside the courthouse in New York. John, just talk us through the choreography and the timeline. What happens next?
Well, my goodness me, Jamie, you know, this city has seen so much. You know that. We have never before seen a former president charged with a crime, but we're going to in the next 4 hours or so. Donald Trump flew in on Trump Force One, which is the nickname given to his private Boeing 757 aircraft. Yesterday, he arrived at Trump Tower in Midtown, about 3.5 miles away from where I am, the courthouse. At about 4 p.m. on Monday afternoon, he spent the night there. He's coming here to the courthouse to be arraigned. And what that means basically is arrested. That's what it means. And he will go to the DA's office, the person who's charging him with these crimes, and then he will come to this courthouse. And at this point, things get very fluid. The truth is, nobody knows for certain what's going to happen next. We assume he'll have his photograph taken. We assume he'll be fingerprinted. We think there could well be some kind of perp walk, some kind of perpetrator walk. We think there's a possibility of handcuffs as well. Now, everybody you talk to will tell you something different. And the truth is, we will not know until we actually see what happens in a couple of hours' time. What we do know, because Trump's lawyer has been speaking this morning, it will be a very brief court appearance, and he will plead not guilty to the charges that stem from a payment made to the adult film actress Stormy Daniels prior to the 2016 general election. Now, we think the charges relate to business fraud concerning the way they wrote down what that payment was. It's a bit complicated, really, but there is a story doing the rounds this morning that says there will be 34 felony charges, so none of them will be misdemeanors, and that they will be read out for the first time in court. There was a story out there that suggested that maybe we would get to see these charges beforehand. We now don't think that's going to happen. So the People versus Donald Trump will get underway in about 4 hours from now, and we're expecting the president sometime in the next 2. Jamie.
John, we can see the barriers behind you in the back of the shot. I mean, presumably security is incredibly tight, and this isn't just for the media. There is an expectation of some crowds and demonstrations.
Yeah, well, Luke, our cameraman, is going to show you now. You'll have to see some of the television paraphernalia before we get to it. But there is a growing demonstration right behind where I'm standing. The police have separated the Trump supporters off from the anti-Trump supporters. We've just had a number of very prominent Congress people come through here, which caused quite a stir. There are 35,000 police officers in New York City, and they're all on duty today, all in uniform. There are numerous road closures. We've had some small protests overnight. This one is, it really is not very big, it has to be said. It could get larger as the day goes on. President Trump, of course, has called for loud protests, but I don't think that the appetite is there for loud protests, in part, I think, because of the charges and the prosecutions that followed what happened on January the 6th, 2021. Jamie?
John, we'll come back to you in an hour or so. For the moment, thanks for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York. Well, let's talk now to Mark Shanahan, Associate Professor of Political Engagement at the University of Surrey. Mark, welcome. Well, as we heard our correspondent, John Terrett, saying, a number of investigations underway. President Trump, former President Trump, reportedly set to face perhaps as many as 30 or so charges. In your view, which of those charges are the most grave and which are the most consequential?
Well, probably the charges that he'll face today are the least of his troubles, despite the fact that we are hearing that it could be 30 felony charges. It's unlikely that even if he was found guilty of these charges, that he'd serve any time in jail. But there are other investigations that are swirling around, that are coming to a head, where clearly the prosecutors want to see what happens in Manhattan today, as to whether they will press the button and go ahead with their own charges. For instance, around the January 6th insurrection, around taking government documents, presidential documents, and holding on to them at Mar-a-Lago. Perhaps the one that he would fear most is down in Fulton County, down in Atlanta in Georgia, where there is a move to try and indict him on interfering with the election back in 2020. If he was indicted and found guilty on that, he would serve serious jail time. And I mean, whatever happens today, it's a humiliation for the president. He may well try and turn it into some kind of martyrdom, but this is unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever happened before.
Just for the sake of clarity, I mean, regardless of the charges and how many or how few, he still will be able to run for president, will he not?
Absolutely. There is nothing in the Constitution that would stop him running for president. He could even be found guilty and go to jail and still be running for president. He could even be elected while in jail, and then perhaps maybe he'd pardon himself, although that's far easier said than done. This is not something that the framers of the Constitution ever thought about. The presidency was supposedly for the greatest and the best of American citizens, but perhaps that's not the case in the 21st century.
Mark, you would have thought Joe Biden's supporters would be rubbing their hands in delight at all of this, but of course this means blanket Donald Trump on the American networks, which during this incredibly long election campaign that we see in the United States is perhaps ironically bad news for Joe Biden and his campaign.
Absolutely. In 2016, Donald Trump got elected to the American presidency by making himself the story. Every day he would go out with some kind of a tweet that would make him the story, and the rest of the political field and all of the media would react. This weirdly gives him a huge platform to be the story again. And it's going to be very, very difficult for any other politician to get any oxygen of publicity, while this case, however it turns out, meanders its way through to the court.
Mark, we shall no doubt talk again in the coming days. For the moment, thank you very much. Mark Shanahan, Associate Professor of Political Engagement at the University of Surrey. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, it's a disappearing dish, a much-loved delicacy, but the decline in numbers of the Yangtze River anchovy might just be turning around.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. French President Emmanuel Macron flies to China for his state visit, with improving relations and boosting trade high on the agenda. Our other headlines: the Finnish flag is raised at NATO headquarters as it becomes the 31st country of the Defence Alliance. The length of Russia's border with NATO countries has now doubled. And as we've been hearing, hush money allegedly paid to a porn star, Donald Trump, set to appear in the next few hours in a New York courthouse where he'll be fingerprinted and formally charged. Virgin Orbit, the satellite launch company founded by the British billionaire Sir Richard Branson, has filed for bankruptcy in the United States. The company failed to secure long-term financing following a high-profile rocket failure in January. Our correspondent Michael Voss reports.
Virgin Orbit's Launcher One rocket is designed to fit beneath a Boeing 747 and then released once airborne to carry small satellites into space. It's been operating out of the US since 2021. But earlier this year, the first launch from the UK went disastrously wrong. The rocket failed to reach orbit and sent its payload of US and UK intelligence satellites crashing into the sea. Last week, the company announced it was laying off 85% of its workforce. Now, after failing to secure additional funding following the rocket failure, the California-based company has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the hope of finding a buyer. The company has listed assets of about $250 million and total debt at $150 million. In a written statement, Virgin Orbit's CEO Dan Hart said that while we've taken great efforts to address our financial position and secure additional financing, we ultimately must do what is best for the business.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. And liftoff. God.
Space was until recently the preserve of governments, but now there are numerous space ventures financed by multi-billionaires, some of which have been labelled vanity projects. Virgin Orbit is a spin-off from Richard Branson's space tourism company Virgin Galactic, which saw the British billionaire become one of its first clients. Amazon's Jeff Bezos also owns a space tourism company, Blue Origin. He too was one of the first to take a weightless ride. Virgin Orbit had hoped that its relatively cheap $12 million Launcher One rockets, released from a jumbo jet, would allow short-notice small satellite launches from anywhere. But such ambitions now depend on finding a willing buyer. And that buyer may soon be put off by the competition from Elon Musk's SpaceX, which provides large rockets for NASA launches, making shared payloads more cost-effective. Michael Voss, CGTN.
The United States and the European Union have pledged to confront any attempts to destabilize global energy markets. The EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken were among the co-chairs at the Energy Council meeting in Brussels. Discussions included the impact of the war in Ukraine and how to ensure energy security while accelerating the green transition. Asia is set for strong growth this year. That's according to the latest report from the Asian Development Bank. The Manila-based bank says economies in Asia and the Pacific are expected to grow by 4.8% this year. And the main factor behind the outlook is China's post-pandemic reopening. It says the world's second largest economy is on track to grow by 5% this year and 4.5% next year. A passenger train in the Netherlands has crashed into a maintenance crane and derailed into a field, killing the crane operator and injuring dozens of passengers. Officials say it's unclear why the crane was on the track, which was still open to railway traffic. Train services will be suspended for the next few days between The Hague and Leiden, one of the country's busiest routes. The Yangtze anchovy is a popular delicacy in China, but it's facing extinction. Now, one of the country's largest anchovy breeding farms is helping to restore depleted fish stocks. Our correspondent Wu Bin reports.
Master Chef Wang is preparing a dish using Yangtze tapertail anchovy. They're also known as coilia fish, but locals here have a simpler name in Chinese, knife fish. Looking at its bright silver skin and sharp tail, it's easy to understand why. Every year around Tomb Sweeping Day in early April, diners flock to the small island city of Yangzhong to sample the delicacy. The fish once thrived in the Yangtze River and was an important source of income for many locals. But it has almost become extinct after years of overfishing, and the market price has risen exponentially. In 2021, China introduced a 10-year fishing ban in a bid to restore biodiversity in the Yangtze River. Artificial breeding has become the solution to help meet market demand and is a requirement of the ban. Tapertail anchovy has been farmed in Yangzhong for over 6 years, but the process is extremely challenging. At China's biggest anchovy fish farm, we meet technical advisor Li Xiaowang, who is welcoming a group of visitors to the facility. He's an expert when it comes to breeding the species.
The fish is too fragile. It will die almost instantly after leaving the water. So it's revolutionary that we have a breakthrough in the breeding process.
The first year of the artificial breeding program yielded thousands of anchovy. The number has since passed 1 million a year. The focus now is on genetically engineering the species to become more resilient and working with China's state electricity grid company to develop an automated feeding system.
In the past, we fed the fish manually. The fish would often concentrate in one spot. The knife fish are too fast, often colliding and injuring each other. Many of them won't survive after being injured.
The National Yangtze Tapertail Anchovy Demonstration Center is expected to produce 50,000 fish for market this year. Li says the aim is now to shorten the time it takes for the fish to reach maturity from 3 to 2 years, to further increase market yield every year. The breeding technology being used will also allow some of the artificially bred anchovy to be released into the Yangtze River, potentially helping restore fish stocks. Wu Bin, CGTN, Yangzhong City, Jiangsu Province.
The headlines again. French President Emmanuel Macron flies to China for his state visit, with improving relations and boosting trade high on the agenda. Our other headlines: the Finnish flag is raised at NATO headquarters as it becomes the 31st member of the Defence Alliance. The length of Russia's border with NATO countries has now doubled. And hush money allegedly paid to a porn star. Donald Trump is set to appear in a New York courthouse where he'll be fingerprinted and formally charged. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.